Now, ladies and gentlemen, commencing with the first session, and we have titled it as Pakistan Development Journey, a historical context where we'll be highlighting 70 years of development. Mona, would you love to explain on it?
Yes, as for the topic, Shahzad, as you've foretold, the session will be joined by our esteemed personalities and shall be moderated by Mr. Ziauddin, who is a seasoned journalist and an analyst himself. For our personalities, a brief introduction for all of them. Dr. Ishrat Hussain, firstly, Dr. Ishrat Hussain has held key national and international assignments such as the Governor, State Bank of Pakistan, the Director of the World Bank, Dean and Director IBA Karachi and Public Policy Fellow at Woodrow Wilson Center, Washington DC. He has received the awards of Hilal-e-Imtiaz and Nishana-e-Imtiaz and is the author of about 18 books.
Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Dr. Ishrat Hussain.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Ishrat Hussain. Let me introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, our second panelist for the discussion and the session today, Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Dr. Shamshad Akhtar is the Under Secretary General of the United Nations and the Executive Secretary of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. She is currently serving as the coordinator of the 5 United Nations regional commissions, and she has previously served as Governor State Bank of Pakistan. Please put your hands together for Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Assalamu alaikum, ma'am. Thank you for joining us.
Moving on.
Mr. Saeed A. Qureshi is our next panelist for the session 1. Mr. Saeed Qureshi has been Deputy Chairman, Planning Commission and Federal Minister. He has also served as Secretary General, Ministry of Finance and Chief Secretary Sindh. And he has recently published a book entitled Governance Deficit, a Case Study of Pakistan.
Mr. Saeed A. Qureshi, ladies and gentlemen.
Moving on, last but not the least at all, our fourth panelist for the session 1 of today's proceedings, Mr. Hussain Dawood, who is a Pakistani industrialist and an ardent philanthropist. He is the chairman of Dawood Hercules Corporation Limited, Engro Corporation Limited, Hub Power Company Limited and Dawood Foundation. He is also the member of World Economic Forum and other top international organizations. Please join us in welcoming Mr. Hussain Dawood.
तालियां थोड़ी जोर से बजाएं, बड़ी दूर से आए हैं सारे मेहमान. Very warm welcome, sir. And now the moderator himself.
Mr. Ziauddin, seasoned journalist and analyst, will be moderating the first session, which is a historical context of Pakistan's development journey. Ziauddin Saab, the stage is all yours.
Thank you. I'll not waste much of your time. I'm honored to be moderating such a distinguished panel. I mean, the people here, the 4 of them, have been through, they have been in the making of this country. Their economic visits. So, before, Dr. Ishrat has already been introduced, and I don't have to repeat it. I am one of his ardent students. So please, Dr. Ishrat.
First of all, let me thank the Planning and Development Division for inviting me to this very, very important occasion. I see a lot of young students, and that is my biggest motivation in order to share my thoughts about the historical journey of Pakistan. So, because even younger people were not born when Pakistan was created in 1947. So this journey has been eclipsed by a sense of gloom and doom, which is very much common in this country. Let me remind this audience that Pakistan was one of the top 10 economic performers among the developing countries in the world during first 40 years. It was not just for few years, or 1 year or 10 years, but it was for 40 years. And these 40 years were very, very turbulent in the history of Pakistan. First, we had a very economic weak base inherited from the partition of India. We didn't have one single large industry in this country. We had continuing political instability after the demise of the founder of the nation, Qaeda-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and the Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan. We absorbed and successfully rehabilitated 8 million refugees, which was equal to 25% of the population of this country, despite those difficult times which the country was facing financially, economically. We fought a war in 1965 with a much bigger neighbor, 8 times our size, and were very much able to retain our territory without any loss. We also went through a painful dismemberment of this country in 1971. The emergence of a regime which was committed to nationalization of private assets in the 1970s, accompanied by the external shock of the major oil increases, gave Pakistan a big blow to the business confidence and dislocation of the economy. This was followed by our close involvement of the Afghan war with the US, which had led to the spread of violence, sectarian troubles, drugs, Kalashnikovs, and shook the social fabric of the country. So despite these 8 very turbulent challenges which this country felt during this period of 40 years, our growth rate was 6% per annum, which was one of the best track record of any country in the world, and we should take great pride. We compared to Bangladesh and India, we were ahead of all economic and social indicators. But as Mr. Ehsan Iqbal pointed out, since 1990, the economy has fallen behind its neighboring countries and has had a decline in the average growth rate from 6.5% to 4.5%, with booms and busts. And these booms were short-lived and could not be sustained over extended periods of time. Of course, political instability and frequent changes in governments in the 1990s may have created uncertainty for investors and slowing down the economic activity, but there has been transition from one elected government to another twice since 2008, but the economic and social indicators have not shown much improvement either. So the work I carried out last year at Woodrow Wilson Center for 1 year was trying to understand the factors which were responsible for this decline and from 1990s to 2015. And I set up from the literature 5 different hypotheses which are used to explain. And I will not bore you with all the details. One was that there is too much of terrorism and violence and political instability in the country, and therefore the result is that things do not work out. But the terrorism actually started in 2001 after we joined the Afghan war. But before that, in 1990s, we had very good economic policies, but we did not have sound economic management. And that is the gap which explains as to why the 1990s were not that welcome period in Pakistan's history. The other hypothesis is that it is always the generous foreign aid, and this is a common phenomena among all Pakistani analysts as well as the foreigners, that whenever you have an injection of foreign aid into Pakistan, the economy takes off, and once the foreign aid comes down, then you are back. I tested this with empirical evidence, with hard facts. And ladies and gentlemen, I myself was surprised that there was no difference between the 1950s, 1970s, 1990s, 2008, 2013, which were the slow period of Pakistan's history, and 1960s, 1980s, and 2001 to 2008, when the country was growing very rapidly as far as the injection of the foreign assistance is concerned. It came in different forms. It was not always the United States aid, but it came in very different form. One of the forms which is not recognized is that in 1990s, despite the fact that US aid had dwindled, we had taken $11 billion of Pakistani residents and non-residents to finance our current account deficits. The third hypothesis is that it is always the military dictators who have actually, with the help of the United States and the Western powers, had strong support from them. And I bring you the facts that in 1965, it was Ayub Khan, but at the time of the war, despite we were CENTO and SEATO ally, our entire assistance was suspended. In 1971, under Yahya Khan, again the military dictator, when we needed help for East Pakistan, the aid was suspended. In the 1980s, Mr. Carter, he was a president, and he imposed sanctions, and these sanctions were not lifted until the Afghan war, in which we became ally of the Soviet Union. In the 1999 October, we had the nuclear sanctions because of the testing, and we also had the military government sanctions, and these were not lifted until the September 2001. So this hypothesis also is not borne by the facts. The fourth hypothesis is about the external environment. But 1990 to 2015 was the best environment for the economies of developing countries. Their share of the world output has actually grown to 50%. Their exports have exceeded those of the advanced countries. China has become the largest exporting nation during this period. India has grown by 7%. Bangladesh has grown by 5%. So this hypothesis that we had an adverse external environment is also not true. Finally, we have the garrison state hypothesis, which is very popular, especially among some of the intellectuals living outside Pakistan. They say it is the domination of the military expenditures which has crowded out expenditures on development and also on education and health, which are the building blocks of economy. But ladies and gentlemen, you will be surprised to know that during first 40 years, Pakistan was spending 6 to 7% of its GDP on defense and nuclear capability. From 1990 to 2015, it has come down to 2.7% of GDP. There has been a tripling down of the defense expenditure as a part of GDP. So that also does not explain. And since 2009, when education and health have been now transferred to the provinces, this is a 3 times increase in the expenditures on education and health during the last 5 years. So that hypothesis also is not borne. So I'm left with the puzzle as to what explains. And this, gentlemen and ladies, is the gorilla in the room. It is the lack of the institutional capability in Pakistan. You had Planning Commission, which was a model for all developing countries in the 1960s. We had WAPDA, which created the largest Indus Basin works in the world. We had PIDC, which created the industrial infrastructure, which was then taken over by the private sector. You had PIA, which helped create Singapore Airlines and Emirates Airlines, and I can go on. This was all during the first 40 years because the civil service was not politicized. It was not used for partisan political purposes. It was not used as a tool of patronage, and it was doing the best work in very competent manner with integrity to serve the people of the country and to deliver the services. This started in 1973 with the reforms where the constitutional guarantee of the civil servants was taken away, and after the 1990s, each political party selected the heads of the institutions and key positions in the bureaucracy on the basis of a loyalty rather than competence. And when you do that, all your institutions become totally dysfunctional. And that is what I have proved here, both with the evidence from other countries, but also evidence from Pakistan. And I've taken 7 indices and shown how the deterioration has taken place. On the other hand, the armed forces, whom we blame that they keep on asserting themselves in the affairs, their efficiency and their competence level has actually improved over time, while our of the civil service has declined. And that imbalance is to be rectified if we have to strengthen the civil democratic governance in this country. We produced a blueprint for the reforms of the civil service. It has not been accepted by any government after 2008. So in this work which I have done, I have taken the second best solution and proposed that only 24 institutions should become autonomous, independent, accountable, free from political interference. These are institutions of accountability, such as the parliamentary committees, Auditor General of Pakistan, National Accountability Bureau, Election Commission of Pakistan, Public Service Commission. In security, the lower judiciary, the police, including investigation and intelligence agencies, federal investigation agencies, NACTA, prosecution departments. For growth, the State Bank of Pakistan, Securities Exchange Commission of Pakistan, Higher Education Commission Pakistan, National Science and Technology Commission, Federal Board of Revenue, Board of Investment, and Trade Development Authority. For equity, Pakistan Agriculture Research Council, the Benazir Income Support Program, the irrigation departments, because there are a lot of inequity in the distribution of water in agriculture areas, the urban development authorities like the KDA, LDA, because they are catering to the higher income groups, but there is nothing available for the lower income groups in the urban areas, and the National Vocational and Technical. And my argument is that if you cannot change the entire landscape of all the civil service and institutions, let us start with few of them and try to mend them and try to strengthen them and they will have spillover effects on other institutions. If you assign Federal Public Service Commission or the Provincial Public Service Commission to select all the officers above grade 17 on merit, these people will then appoint their own subordinates on merit, and the institution therefore will be much stronger and much healthier than what we have today. So this is the essence of my future direction, that we have to go back to what we were good at in the up to 1990s and gain the space we have lost to the armed forces. That is because whenever you have a vacuum, stronger institutions come in and fill in that vacuum. We, by strengthening these civilian institutions, will be able to keep our armed forces to do their professional work, which is to secure the external territories of Pakistan, which they're very good at, rather than go for census, go for meter reading, go for law and order in the cities, and other things which are our domain of the civil institutions and not that of the armed forces. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you very much. Dr. Saab is something like Baba economy of this country. He has traced the history of Pakistan's economy with a lot of precision and focus. The first 40 years, the next 30 years, he has made it so clear. See, I tend to agree with him that most of the successes which we achieved in the first 40 years were adversely affected by the 65 war, then the 71 war, then the 1980 war, that is the first Afghan war, and during the 1990s, we fought two low-intensity wars, one on the side of the Taliban against the Northern Alliance, one on the side of the Kashmiri independent struggle on the side of those who were fighting that war. And as soon as this war ended, we entered into another war, that was the second Afghan war. And now we are involved in another war, that is war on terrorism. And today we are involved in the east, on the LOC, in the west, the Afghanistan, Iran, and then the fourth front, the inside, the war on terror within this country. So when you are, fighting wars, when you become, almost during the last 36 years, this country has become a war zone. And when you have you're tackling a war zone, how can you have an economy which would provide affordable education to the people of this country, affordable health cover, affordable transport, affordable health, housing. And then Dr. Saab also mentioned about the fall in the competence of the civil service, which directly affects the governance. Thank you very much, Dr. Saab. Now I would like to invite the next speaker, Dr. She has also been introduced. She has been a very, important person. Like she was the governor of the State Bank in this country, and during her tenure, Pakistan had enjoyed one of the best, growth rates. Thank you, Dr.
Me and Ishrat did something for in our role as regulators. But good afternoon to everybody, because it's almost noon time. I'm really thankful to the Planning Commission, Planning and Reform Commission, now it's called, for inviting me in my capacity as UNSCAP. I'm really delighted to meet a lot of colleagues with whom I have worked. And as Ishrat Saab said, it's a pleasure to have the youth here who are our future. I think there has been a lot of reflection thus far about where we were, how did we transform ourselves, and where we stand, issues, challenges, the context in which we have delivered within the daunting challenges. So I think rather than repeat myself on some of those things which I fully concur with, I'd like to just mention that given that I am coming from Bangkok for this trip, that I was very delighted to join the celebrations of the 70th anniversary at Embassy of Pakistan, which makes us very proud being there. But what was special for me is that the 70th anniversary of Pakistan's independence coincides with the 70th anniversary of the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific, called ESCAP, that I am currently in charge of. So from my standpoint, this is an opportunity to reflect more on present and forward, going forward. This is an opportunity to reflect on how Pakistan and ESCAP can foster regional cooperation and integration, so critical for the country's repositioning to achieve long-term economic sustainability. Structural, fiscal and external imbalances. Second, low investment levels. You try to look at the graph and there could be some blips, but by and large, on an average, it's been low. There's been lack of economic diversification. I'm always perplexed by the risk averseness of bankers and investors, and of course, a very weak implementation track record that complicates the cost of delivery. There's a lot of evidence on all this, so I'm not going to give facts and figures in interest of time. Industrial capacities created largely service today domestic demand. And you heard the minister earlier saying our exports have hovered around 22 to 25%. Of course, when you have a very high domestic demand and when people are not looking at outside markets, you have limited scope for exports. The demand prospects of which have, of course, not been exploited. It's not as if we don't have market outside, but we haven't positioned our industry to take advantage of the demand outside. So achieving a turnaround in Pakistan's export performance, to me, is a very critical path to examine, as boosting foreign exchange reserves through borrowings at best induces vulnerabilities and is not at all sustainable. In my 3 years in Pakistan, we recognize this to be the most important problem as we were struggling to maintain stability of exchange rate as well as arrest the swift drawdown of reserves. And this is simply because of the low exports, while imports are just going double or triple the levels of your export. In this context, a first order of priority ought to be a coordinated public and private action to adopt and effectively implement an aggressive, dynamic, and higher value export-oriented industrial strategy. This requires building new, competitive, and diversified industrial capacities, drawing on technological and digital know-how with supportive investment in human capital, innovation, and productivity. Broader integration of the country into the global and regional economy, of course, is going to be very critical for Pakistan. And this calls for enhancement and recalibration of its regional cooperation strategy, backed by increased commercial exchanges with neighboring countries. It's very topical in Pakistan to talk about regional cooperation in context of CPEC. But I think there's more to it. We do know Pakistan has been open to regional cooperation, not today, but for a long time. Its geographical location is an asset, close to China, Iran, and Turkey, and the Central Asian republics on the one hand, but also South Asia on the other. The country has been a founding member of both Economic Cooperation Organization and SAARC. Yet, despite geographic proximity of their members, the sub-regional arrangements have not serviced well the interests of Pakistan. SAARC's today's dysfunctionality has restrained growth in bilateral trade between Pakistan and India and other trading partners, which could be anywhere from 10 to 12 times higher than at its current level. Intra-regional trade could grow to over 170 billion by 2020 if peace and stability were restored, trade liberalized, and non-tariff barriers removed. Drawing on the lessons from successful sub-regional blocs will be instrumental for Pakistan to further deepening of cooperation. ASEAN, now celebrating its 50th anniversary, owes its origin to the membership's agreement to initially promote ASEAN political integration as a prerequisite to nurturing peace and stability in the region while protecting, of course, the sovereign rights of the country. There are formal agreements to this effect. The peace and stability pillar is the backbone of ASEAN's economic, social, and cultural integration and is now expected to be fostered by adoption of the 2025 Vision and Action Plan of ASEAN, and we are at a juncture of trying to implement our 2025 Vision. ASEAN 2025 Vision and Action Plan will promote a single market for goods and services. Ownership of the sub-regional bloc of ASEAN membership is high, even though intergovernmental negotiation processes are more lengthy within ASEAN. More recently, an SCAP coordinated program of action with United Nations-wide engagement has been put in place to speed up and offer coherent support for the implementation of ASEAN's action plan. SCAP is now working with ASEAN to enhance the complementarity of the action plan with the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda while promoting ASEAN connectivity, including, among others, ASEAN Power Grid that we are positioning to promote. A critical element of ASEAN's success has also been its membership's drive to pursue their domestic, political, and economic transformation backed by joint macroeconomic and financial surveillance of member states. We often look at regional economic cooperation as something which has nothing to do with our domestic transformation. So that's why I'm bringing this, that you can't have regional cooperation without fundamentally altering the way you do your business. The private sector has been, of course, at the forefront of leading the growth in intra-regional trade in ASEAN or Asia at large that has reached almost 24% of the sub-region's total trade, supported by regional production and value chains benefiting from not only sub-regional preferential agreements, but also ASEAN's free trade agreements with US, China, Korea, and India. So there's a lot that's out there, and I'm not saying we can necessarily replicate ASEAN in South Asia, but there are some fundamental elements of it and take-home messages that we have to work together. Of course, we have a problem, some unwilling partners within SAARC. Investment in regional cooperation has seen ASEAN emerge as the world's sixth largest economy. Its collective GDP is expected to rise to 5.2 trillion by 2025, becoming the fourth largest economy in the world with 600 million plus population. So what do people look when they are attracted to cooperating with you? They are attracted by your domestic state of play, by your strengths, not only just to cater your domestic economy, but to actually be able to interact with the world. Let me turn to another element which is becoming very important on the UNSCAP platform. At the first ministerial conference on regional economic cooperation and integration, what we call in SCAP as RECI, SCAP's membership adopted what is called the Bangkok Declaration that revolves around a four-pillar agenda. It calls for regional market integration, calls for seamless regional connectivity, it calls for enhancing regional financial cooperation, and fourth, addressing shared transboundary vulnerabilities, risks, and challenges. There is optimism that Asia and the Pacific region should benefit from some changing political dynamics. Of course, the opening up of Myanmar, I just came back last night from there and then came out straight here. Amazing changes that are happening despite the political environment in which they are operating. We've also had lifting of sanctions in Iran, which have opened up new opportunities, and the integration of post-conflict states all provide, of course, new opportunities. And despite all the noise we hear about some of these conflict-prone countries or post-conflict countries, I'm amazed at what is going on to achieve a statehood and a national transformation in these new emerging small conflict-prone countries. So we are no different if we are having political instability and political difficulties. It's the private sector, it's the civil society. Of course, what we do need is mature political leadership and stability. But there are few key elements that I'd like to share with you that are becoming kind of the frontier regional cooperation elements in how they are going to be driving regional cooperation integration going forward. First, there is a need for a fundamental rethink of traditional, and I'm going to call regional economic cooperation and integration for short, RECI. So there is a traditional, there's a rethink of traditional RECI models and policy frameworks to promote a transition from what we would call traditional growth-centric approach to one driven now by sustainable development, incorporating social and environmental considerations. Hence, the RECI framework going forward must be guided by the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Agenda, which has been globally approved and has been harnessed, and its advocacy and technical knowledge is being enriched on the UNSCAP platform, to which Pakistan is very much associated with. And Minister of Planning, former Minister of Planning, Ahsan Iqbal, actually was the chair of the Asia Pacific Sustainable Development Platform after Kazakhstan, Sri Lanka, and others. And he was supposed to take the message to the high-level political forum in United Nations of what the Asia-Pacific Sustainable Development Implementation Game Plan is, but for the transitional issues that emerged. But in this context, of course, it's important that hence the RESI framework, be it sub-regional level or larger Asia-Pacific, will have to be going forward, be guided by the 2030 agenda. In this context, RESI has been now well integrated in the Asia-Pacific regional roadmap for implementing the 2030 agenda by the ESCAP member states, negotiated over the last 6 months. If you know, United Nations have some of these problems of protracted negotiations as much as we think we have protracted negotiations, and it was adopted by our Commission in May 2017. This regional roadmap would help member states, among others, to focus on addressing regional transboundary vulnerabilities and risks from climate change, dealing with regional pollution by adopting cleaner technology, adopting more environmental friendly modes of transport, and promoting energy access and energy security by interconnecting regional energy networks to integrate renewable energy given its variability issues. A second element of the RESI dimensions which is important is the market integration. Market integration must be recognized as the core driver of RESI. The recent rise of global protectionism and disruption in labor mobility, prompted by growing nationalistic sentiments, have cast a shadow over efforts to pursue the gains of market integration. There are other considerable challenges which need to be overcome to achieve market integration across the Asia-Pacific. For instance, the trade cost of our region remains high in tariff equivalent terms. Trade costs between the SAARC bloc and North and Central Asia, which we aspire to link with, have interlinkages, have been stubbornly high at 285%. The bulk of this emerges from a range of non-tariff barriers owing to custom clearance issues, regulatory impediments, port congestions, and shipping delays cost time and money. And I have to say, I feel exhausted with this agenda because I remember after coming to Pakistan and joining the World Bank here, this is all the work we were doing to dismantle non-tariff barriers and of course mobilize tax revenues, and we seem to be where we were at this stage. Equally critical will be the realignment of global and regional value chains because of what's happening globally and what's happening to the slowdown of the global exports. So consolidating and rationalizing the 170 regional preferential trade agreements, which is often called the Asia's noodle ball, based on multilateral principles, is a key priority and will enhance efficiency, equity, and transparency of trade regimes. Reform of regional investment agreements, including in the service sector, are required to replace opaque privileges and tax incentives which will result in nothing but revenue losses, with more transparent and open foreign direct regimes supported by an effective state dispute resolution mechanism. You may think this is like a textbook thing, but I'll tell you, this is really real. I was in a meeting which was sponsored by ASEAN and India. They were negotiating ASEAN-India free trade. Well, they were celebrating the ASEAN-India free trade. And I asked the question from a couple of foreign ministers, which agreement does your private sector rely on? Is it the ASEAN agreement? Is it the ASEAN-India agreement? Or is it your bilateral agreements, say of ASEAN with Japan or ASEAN or Thailand with Japan and so forth? Can you imagine? Nobody had an answer of it. This is the state of the policymakers. Imagine the problems business community faces with this myriad of regional preferential trade agreements and very distorted investment agreements. So work is out there, and investment agreements are very important because they also look at procurement rules and other things going forward. Let me quickly go to my last point, which is the third point, that RESI is now being reinforced by a range of regional mega initiatives such as the BRI and Eurasian integration projects for the mutual benefits of all members. So we are in between this because we are not only laying what we call the next generation architecture of RESI for the benefit of membership like yours, but we are also being drawn into the mega initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, the Euro-Asian Initiative, and I recently received a letter from the Deputy Prime Minister of Russia to help them with the Asia Super Ring for the Northeast Asia Belt. So there are multiple things that are happening all over the world. The Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs and SCAP are very steadfast partners. They were the first one to sign an agreement with us under which SCAP undertook an initial assessment of the 6 BRI corridors and underscored the need to extend BRI to squarely foster market integration, but also reinforce holistic, seamless and sustainable regional connectivity across corridors, not to start from scratch. There is Asian highways, there's ASEAN highway, there's Asian energy networks, there's ASEAN energy network. So we kind of need to work towards getting these missing links worked. And I must say, I don't get a feel for this in Pakistan. It's a very domestically driven agenda, but I hope ultimately it falls together. So we are pushing for reinforcement of holistic, seamless and sustainable energy connectivity, which is multimodal across corridors with due regard for social and environmental safeguards, and adopting and benefiting from SCAP's normative model agreements, standards and regulation for trade, transport and investment facilitation and liberalization and facilitation negotiation of transport agreements across newer corridors and transit corridors. The problem is which agreement will apply when you are in a tripartite or even a broader agreement, and they are getting a model agreement for you from UN SCAP to deploy neutralizes the politics of whose agreement will fall in place, will be applicable here. So the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor stands out as a flagship of the BRI. We all are very proud of as steadfast partners between Pakistan and China. And this flagship will be instrumental in adding new energy capacities, including renewables and constructing alternate and competitive routes, opening up access for China and other landlocked countries access to Gwadar port, as has been discussed, while also promoting industrial development. It entails the construction of road, fiber optic projects, rail links and many hydropower and coal plants. Efforts which could be particularly beneficial if there could be more information sharing on processes, projects and terms and conditions of financing transactions to further public confidence, a matter of governance of this regime and associated regimes. And if the regulatory infrastructure could be strengthened to support trade, investment and global value chains and pricing mechanism while fostering market integration through broader transport and trade facilitation reforms. So we think a road is built, so yes, let's have a ceremony out there. I think the work cannot go on like that. We have to really get into the nitty-gritty and the nuts and bolts of the policy integration for a sustainable impact. So in Pakistan, of course, we can benefit a lot. As many as 700 jobs could be created through the China-Pakistan economic corridor between 2015 and 2030, provided we have a skilled workforce. It holds great promise of course, closer trade, investment and energy cooperation between the two countries and beyond. Indeed, this corridor could support trade and economic integration in the broader region, particularly between China, Pakistan, Iran, India, Afghanistan and Central Asia. So to conclude, finally, we are very much involved in the kind of architecture of BRI. We will be having not only a regional cooperation and integration ministerial meeting in November, but on the sidelines, an event on BRI with the senior officials. There is need for Asia and to, of course, understand that there is need for broadening and deepening this RECI and in the process consider pragmatic approaches to re-strategizing RECI and of course diversifying so that your risks are diversified, both country product and infrastructure composition. It has to be supportive of the sustainable development agenda, and we have to use the opportunity to accelerate implementation of cross-boundary goals such as the natural disasters, which are the shared vulnerabilities between our neighboring countries and ourselves. Of course, this will only come if we promote seamlessly climate-friendly infrastructure and area, of course, underemphasized in our economies. So ESCAP is driving and will continue to drive a reinvigorated region-wide approach to cooperative arrangements and supporting its member states to maximize the benefits, delivery and impact of mega initiatives, including the BRI Eurasia, and ensure it delivers outcomes that support sustainable development achievement. We don't lend money, but we work intergovernmentally to propagate the right mix of policies. So to realize full potential of regional cooperation initiative, Pakistan needs to fast-track domestic structural reforms so critical for regional trade and investment flows. This blip up and down is not something which attracts me because I saw how it goes down if there is political volatility. Sustainable development pathways, supportive legal, regulatory and policy frameworks, strengthen public finance, deeper capital markets and favorable business environment are, along with the governance messages of Dr. Ishrat, are all prerequisite for maximizing the benefits of RECI. ESCAP will remain to continue to work steadfastly with Pakistan and other member states of Asia Pacific to realize the vision of a more interconnected region, one that is prosperous, sustainable and peaceful. Thank you.
Borders, we have closed our western border, we have closed our northwestern border for trade and economic relationship. We have the northern border, which is very, very far off, and perhaps it will take some time for economic corridor to take effect. And in the south, we have a small little port, which is not even enough for our own exports and imports. So we need to do some radical thinking on this. We must look at what Afghanistan wants. Afghanistan wants a corridor through Pakistan. Make a deal on this. Make a bargain on this. Discuss it with India that if we are ready to give you the land route, what would we get out of it? So, see, actually, We have been trying to make Pakistan an export-led economy, which we have failed in the last 70 years. We have not been able to do anything on that. So why not become a transshipment economy? Now this economic corridor is giving us one fantastic opportunity for this. Transshipment, a wholesale economy, perhaps is the best way out of Pakistan's economic, stagnation. Let's revise our import policy. Let's, reduce the tariffs on intermediaries and raw materials, and bring in knockdown conditions equipment. Do value addition in Pakistan and re-export them. So perhaps even those countries which are exporting to Pakistan a number of goods, maybe they will perhaps also think to manufacture those items inside Pakistan rather than exporting them to Pakistan. And through that we can even transfer technology, improve the skills of our workers. So there is this aspect. We should have some kind of radical thinking on this. Thank you very much. Thank you. Invite Dr. Qureshi.
Mr. Ziauddin, Mr. Shoaib Siddiqui, ladies and gentlemen, the subject of my presentation is hindrances to economic development. When we go back to the 1950s, when this debate had started, Arthur Lewis had propagated the dual economy model, industry and agriculture. These are the two main sectors which he was discussing. And his thesis was that the two main inputs into development are labor and capital, and agriculture sector can spare labor, it has surplus labor, and therefore there will be no impact on agricultural production if the labor moves out. The critical missing factor remains the capital. And there is not enough capital because the countries are poor, they don't save enough, therefore they don't invest enough, and therefore they remain trapped in the vicious circle of poverty. As time passed, later on it was realized that the domestic savings were not the only constraint. There was the foreign exchange constraint also, because the country needed to import machinery, it needed to import the intermediates, some of the other raw materials for which foreign exchange was needed, and most of these countries were not able to generate enough foreign exchange earnings, and therefore they were handicapped in their development process. And later on, the importance of human resources was realized, and that was emphasized as one of the main factors which were critical to the development process, and countries which were poor in human resources were not able to develop properly. Now, these constraints, of course, continue to be a problem. I have drawn up my own list, and I'd like to share with you 9 major constraints. The first constraint is the state of security, not only for economic development, but more importantly, for the proper functioning of the country as a state. Life, liberty, and property. We are all familiar with what happened since 2004. The country has been subjected to an unrelenting wave of terrorism. In the last few years, there is some improvement, but there is still a long way to go. Though this is still the major problem. Second problem is that Pakistan has been a rent seeker's paradise. The textile development were the earliest beneficiaries of this rent seeking because they were given 100% protection. The imports were banned and therefore they were able to completely control the domestic market, and the industry in those days generated huge profits. The capital investment was they were able to get it back within 2 years generally, and some of them in 1 year. The further subsidy was provided by the overvalued foreign exchange, the exchange rate, which was overvalued, and that meant that they had cheap capital. In the 1970s, when Pakistan devalued, this exchange rate was brought to an equilibrium level of rupees 11 to the dollar, from 4.76 to rupees 11 to the dollar. That was the gap which was giving benefits to the local capital users. Now, at that time, cotton was subjected to an export duty of 40%. So we were able to get cotton at 60% of the world prices. In fact, less than 60%, because if you work on import parity, then it was much less than 60%. And that was a huge subsidy provided to the textile sector. Now this has reduced the competitive strength of the textile industry, and we all know that what is happening today, and they're losing the market. The third factor is that we have not been able to develop competitive strength in our exports, and therefore our share of the world market has been going down. Basically, the industrial culture is still oriented to commodity exports rather than product differentiation, and price is the main attraction given to the foreign buyer rather than the quality of the products, and marketing has not been emphasized, with the result that we have been left behind. And Bangladesh was established in 1971. A lot of people in West Pakistan were saying that they don't have cotton, they don't have yarn, we are supplying them the yarn, and they are going to be greatly handicapped. And today, Bangladesh is exporting garments in the region of $30 billion, and our garments exports are in the region of $2.5 billion. So that's what has happened. My own experience I'd like to share with you as Secretary Commerce. I had 3 very frustrating developments to face. First of all, I proposed to the government that basmati exports should be thrown open to the private sector. At that time, public sector monopoly was operating in the basmati exports. So the government accepted this proposal and it was thrown open to the private sector. My hope was that this will, like India, our exporters will use brand names, they'll be aggressive in marketing, and they'll be able to make a dent where India was taking over our share of the exports. But it did not happen, except that guard basmati, only one or two, which was already operating. हाँ ये बैठे हुए हैं, इनका था सिर्फ यो पहले से था, वो बाद में नहीं किया गार्ड वालों का, लेकिन बाकी लोग कोई खास मैदान में नहीं आए. दूसरा मेरा तजर्बा ये हुआ, I called a meeting of the jewelry exporters and I asked the Federal Board of Revenue to come to that meeting when I was Secretary Commerce. मैंने उनसे कहा कि भाई इंडिया वाले आपसे को 10 गुना ज्वेलरी एक्सपोर्ट कर रहे हैं और हमारी स्किल मिक्स वही है जो उनकी है, हमारे कारीगर को उनसे पीछे नहीं हैं, एंड वाई कांट वी मेक ए डेंट इन द मार्केट फॉर ज्वेलरी एक्सपोर्ट. तो उन्होंने कहा जी हमारी कुछ डिमांड्स हैं, वो अगर पूरी हो जाएं तो हम आपको बहुत अच्छा रिजल्ट देंगे. तो FBR वाज देयर. उन्होंने बेसिकली उनकी डिमांड ये थी कि हमें अंडर बॉन्ड अलाउ कर दिया जाए डायमंड की एक्सपोर्ट और गोल्ड की एक्सपोर्ट विदाउट कस्टम ड्यूटी. FBR agreed immediately and they issued the notification, but the results are still not available. We have not been able to make a major dent on the jewelry export. My third experience was I went to Faisalabad, which is the main center of textile industry. This is way back in 1990 when I was working as Commerce Secretary. So I was busy the whole day. In the evening, I went to the house of Siddiq brothers. They were the major suppliers of power looms in the country. लेकिन उनकी टेक्नोलॉजी जो थी वो 1930s की थी. So I went to their house and I asked them कि can we help you to modernize your technology? तो उन्होंने कहा कि सेक्रेटरी साहब आप फिक्र ना करें, हमारी लूमें तो धड़ाधड़ बिक रही हैं, तो हमें कोई ज़रूरत नहीं है मॉडर्न टेक्नोलॉजी. और रिजल्ट उसका आज आपके सामने है कि वी बीन लेफ्ट बिहाइंड इन द टेक्सटाइल इंडस्ट्री. सो दिस हैज़ बीन हैपनिंग ऑन द इंडस्ट्रियल फ्रंट. My fourth constraint is that we have in the administration we have a culture of patronage which is deeply rooted and merit is disregarded. And when you have a society oriented to patronage, it's very difficult to develop competitive strength because the incentives for that incentives are not there. And this has been one of the major problems. It's the feudal culture of patronage we have not been able to get over. And fifth is the knowledge gap. And our educational system is archaic and there's emphasizes rote learning rather than independent thinking. The teachers have lost commitment. Early days में उस्ताद इससे ज़्यादा motivated थे. Unfortunately, now they've become more materialistic and they are concentrating on tuition, private tuitions, providing tuition. And there is large-scale absenteeism and a number of ghost schools are there where salaries are being drawn, but the school is not functioning. मैं जब सेक्रेटरी एजुकेशन था तो I went on a visit to Quetta और वहाँ उन्होंने मुझे एजुकेशन एसोसिएशन टीचर्स एसोसिएशन उन्होंने मुझे अप्रोच किया जी कि हमारी कुछ डिमांड्स हैं मुतालबात हैं और हम आपसे डिस्कस करना चाहते हैं. So I called the provincial education department and I listened to their demands. Some of them were certainly very genuine. At the end of this meeting, मैंने कहा जी मैंने आपकी बातें सुन ली हैं, आप मेरी बात सुने और मुझे ये बताएं कि जो टीचर या आपसे तनख्वाह लेते हैं और दुबई में ड्राइवरी करते हैं वो क्या सूरत हालात है. And they came out with a very surprising statement. They said कि सर आपका ये तासुर गलत है कि वो टीचर तनख्वाह ले रहे हैं. वो टीचर तनख्वाह नहीं ले रहे. The rest of the system is taking their salary. और उन्होंने कहा कि 18 टीचर्स की सैलरी हमारे सूबाई वजीर तालीम के घर जा रही है. तो एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट वाले बैठे थे. मैंने कहा जी सुन ले इनकी बात, ये कह रहे हैं आपके डिपार्टमेंट के मुतालिक. So this is the situation. Obviously, when the world is moving to a knowledge economy, this sort of educational system will not be able to provide the right inputs, and we need to take care of this. Sixth, we have a continuous problem of lack of documentation and poor tax realization, which has been made worse by, I think so far, अभी तक हम 10 हमें वो इम्यूनिटी दे चुके हैं उसको टैक्स कम्युनिटी कि आप डिक्लेयर कर दें हिडन वेल्थ 2% 3% दे के आपको टैक्स माफ कर देंगे. ये बार बार दिस distorts the incentive for payment of taxes. Lekin we have been doing that. We've been floating bearer instruments, no questions asked. So this is the sort of situation which is provides perverse incentives for tax payment. This has to be changed. and documentation has to be improved. Amnesty schemes are a bad experience, and I think in future we should make sure that we don't introduce any new amnesty scheme. Seventh, there are frequent lapses from financial stability, internal and external, domestic front as well as, more importantly, the foreign exchange front, which creates a crisis, and we have to rush either to the World Bank or to IMF for retrieval of the situation. और फिर ये होता है कि they prescribe austerity measures, which means more taxes, and relief to the poor is compromised because no subsidies and expenditure cuts are enforced, with the result that this militates against employment and also lowers the income level. अब IMF ने 2011 में एक पेपर लिखा, उसमें उन्होंने इस चीज़ को एडमिट किया कि फिजिकल कंसोलिडेशन डज प्रोड्यूस दिस रिजल्ट, लेकिन जब हमसे नेगोशिएट कर रहे थे तो ये बात नहीं कहते थे वो। और मैंने अपनी किताब में लिखा है कि उन्होंने तकरीबन 100 कंडीशनलिटीज डाल दी थी 88 में, और दिस प्रोसेस हैज बीन रिपीटेड अगेन एंड अगेन. This obviously has hindered the development process. And we have eighth. The eighth constraint is that we have not attended to the population problem seriously. Only in Ayub Khan's regime this was tackled seriously. After that, no government, whether it's a religious type of government or it's secular type of government, no government has taken any deep interest in population planning, and therefore we have a situation in which your population is going to increase at a very high rate, and you don't have enough savings, you don't have enough taxes. So this is a very difficult combination, and it's going to cut at the roots of development. It already is doing that. Finally, there is a gap between conception and creation. The implementation process is not emphasized adequately, with the result that there is a delivery deficit. In the book that I have written on governance deficit, a case study of Pakistan, I have devoted a separate chapter on delivery deficit, and I have quoted umpteen examples in various sectors, including the project implementation, how we have been handicapped. And one of the main contents of that chapter is the 1959 education policy. और ये किताब लिखी गई थी 2014 में. 59 से लेके 2014 तक 14 रिकमेंडेशंस ऐसी थी जो कंट्रोवर्शियल नहीं थी, लेकिन इन 50 सालों में उनमें से एक भी रिकमेंडेशन इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं हुई. तो एजुकेशन सेक्रेटरी को मैंने लेटर लिखा कि प्लीज़ कंफर्म और कॉन्ट्रडिक्ट मी, तो उसने कहा ये ठीक कह रहे हैं आप, ये रिसोर्स कंस्ट्रेंट था वगैरह वगैरह. बट दिस इज नॉट अ वे ऑफ डेवलपिंग a country, and I think we need to emphasize the plan implementation is as important as plan making itself, and this needs to be improved. Otherwise, we shall not be able to deliver. And because of this problem, there are cost overruns, and the benefits of developments are delayed. And there is a laxity of administrative culture seeping through the system through these measures. These are the 9 issues. Ladies and gentlemen, we also need to take notice of the work that is being done by international agencies who are monitoring the economic governance of Pakistan. And there have been certain developments on that front which I'd like to share with you. The work being done by these monitoring agencies is, has the following characteristics. Number one, it has a movement, denotes a movement from the academic to the operational field. And number two, It emphasizes basically not economic growth itself, but the factors which inhibit the investment. And there cannot be growth without investment. Therefore, by implication, it does become a hindrance to development process also. And they are very precise. They have mathematically expressed their conclusions, और वो स्कोर बनाते हैं और कंपैरेटिव रेटिंग ऑफ वेरियस कंट्रीज वो बनाते हैं. इसमें 3 इंस्टीट्यूशंस को मैं हाईलाइट करूंगा, और तो बहुत ज़्यादा ये एजेंसीज हैं, एंड द नंबर इज ग्रोइंग ऑल द टाइम. वन इज द वर्ल्ड इकोनॉमिक फोरम. वो कंपेटिटिव स्ट्रेंथ ऑफ वेरियस इकोनॉमीज मेजर करते हैं, और 12 पिलर्स उन्होंने उसमें रखे हैं, जो विच आर द मेन फैक्टर्स which are crucial to economic investment, and therefore economic institutions, infrastructure, macroeconomic stability, health and primary education, and higher education and training, efficiency of goods market, efficiency of labor market, financial market sophistication, technological readiness, market size, and innovation. Now they cover 138 countries, and Pakistan ranks 122, 16 from the bottom. It's the lowest in South Asia. India is 39, Sri Lanka is 71, Bhutan is 97, Nepal 98, and Bangladesh is also ahead of us. This is 106. The next index, which is very popular and highly prestigious, is the World Bank Index, Ease of Doing Business. अब ये 10 उनके क्राइटेरिया है जिसमें मेजर करते हैं स्टार्टिंग द बिजनेस, गेटिंग कंस्ट्रक्शन परमिट्स, getting electricity, registration of property, getting credit, investment protection, enforcement of contracts, resolving insolvency and cross-border trade. ये 10 हैं. इनकी बिना पे वो ease of doing business को measure करते हैं, और इसमें the latest survey वो मैंने देखी है 2017 की, it covers 190 countries, और 2017 का जो इंडेक्स बनाया है उसमें 190 में पाकिस्तान का नंबर है 144. It's pretty bad. The only country in South Asia which is lower is Bangladesh, which is 176, और बाकी सारे मुल्क हमसे आगे हैं. तीसरा इंडेक्स जो मैं हाईलाइट करूंगा ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स है. वी ऑल नो डॉक्टर महबूबुल हक हैड स्टार्टेड दिस इंडेक्स. इन दैट the rating pertains to 185 countries, and Pakistan is 147, which is pretty low. India is 131, Sri Lanka is 73, Nepal is 144, and Bangladesh 139. Every country in South Asia is ahead of Pakistan in the Human Development Index. Now these are the 3 main which I wish to emphasize, but the large number. In my book on governance deficit, I have highlighted indices from 14 agencies, and maybe you can have a look at them. They pertain to governance indicators by the World Bank, corruption perception index, rule of law index, BTI's management index, fragile states. पहले उनको फेल्ड स्टेट लिखते थे और लोगों ने प्रोटेस्ट करना शुरू किया तो अब वो कहते हैं फ्रेजाइल स्टेट. तो फ्रेजाइल स्टेट इंडेक्स है, इंडेक्स ऑफ इकोनॉमिक फ्रीडम, prosperity index. These are the indices which I have highlighted in my book, but this is not a complete list. There are the number of institutions which monitor your performance is growing all the time, and they give you a certain score. They also indicate your comparative rating, how are you doing vis-a-vis other countries in your own region as well as the entire world. And since this has a deep implication for the investment process, then becomes a factor which also becomes a hindrance to development. I think we need to take notice of this. I'm sure Pakistan can overcome these challenges. We only have to try harder. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. A very depressing picture you have painted. But I find myself in total agreement with all your 9 points. Governance has been very, very bad in this country. Successive governments have ruled this country. They have never governed this country. और स्टूडेंट्स तो काफ़ी यहाँ पर हैं, इसलिए मैं ज़रा सा कुरैशी साहब की जो बातें थी, खासकर इमदाद की, डोल डिपेंडेंट रहा है हमारा मुल्क. यानी हम पिछले 70 साल में जो भी हमने तरक्की की है वो कर्ज़ों पे की है, जो इमदाद पे की है. हमने खुद अपनी ग्रोथ जो है ना उस पर कोई ज़्यादा फोकस नहीं किया. और जो इस हमारी इमदाद आई है बायलैटरल दूसरे मुल्कों से जो आई है, उसमें हर डॉलर में से 99 सेंट्स वापस चले जाते हैं उनके पास. और जो वर्ल्ड बैंक से का लोन आता है, इमदाद आती है, उसमें रेगुलेशन इतनी सख्त होती हैं कि उनके प्रोजेक्ट्स कंप्लीट ही नहीं होते हमारे पास. और IMF की कंडीशनैलिटी जो हैं वो इतने सख्त होते हैं, वो वन साइज फिट ऑल वाली बात होती है. यानी वो ये नहीं देखते कि इस मुल्क की एक्चुअल जो ज़रूरियात हैं वो हैं क्या, और वो एक कंडीशन लगा देते हैं. और हुआ ये कि पिछली दफ़ा IMF की जो प्रोग्राम हमने किया 16 वेवर्स हमें दिए, 16, और फिर भी कहते हैं कि बड़ी सक्सेसफुल रही है. तो डॉक्टर कुरैशी साहब ने वाकई एक कूजे में बंद कर दिया हमारी इकोनॉमी जो 70 साल की थी, कि इसमें जो जो खराबियां थी उन्होंने अपनी 9 पॉइंट्स में बता दिया. मैं प्लानिंग कमीशन को चाहिए कि इनके ये जो चैप्टर है उस पर ज़रा सा गौर करें. शुक्रिया.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly honored to be here to give you a little background of my experiences in working in Pakistan. But before I do that, I want to do something that's very unusual. Would you all stand up for a minute and take a break? Stand up. Stretch yourselves. Feeling good? Sit down, please. Thank you. Now, you've had the privilege of listening to some outstanding presentations today. Mr. Hassan Iqbal, Mr. Sataz Aziz, and the panel here has been outstanding in delivering you. They talked at the highest level. The panel has given the next level. Now I'll give you what I call the practical level. The people who are affected by the thinking of government, the thinking of those who support the government and prepare the policies for them, and finally those who have to perform within that framework. I'm going to try to go as quickly as I can because I'm sure you must be all very tired. I'll try to talk a little bit about history, growth of our group, some of the achievements that we've done, and then some of the learnings that we have from that, and then the way forward. So I'll start off with the history. By the grace of God, my father, who established the group, he started work in 1917. So I consider that for us the beginning of our group. So this is our 100th year. he started a group of in India, undivided India, and very quickly our business there was that we were trading in cotton yarns. And we became the cotton yarn kings of India. At the time of partition, we jettisoned all that, left it behind, and came to Pakistan, where we again established trading. That was our forte. Pakistan being a completely new country is what we call in the business sector is a startup phase. And the most difficult years are the startup years, because the whole endeavor is to try to establish yourself. Our group has actually patterned the history of Pakistan. So when we came here at the time of partition, we too were a startup, just like the country. And very quickly, the government of Pakistan resolved that they had to develop the economy and they had to develop industry. So they encouraged us to go into industry. My uncles went off to Japan, bought 25,000 spindles, brought them back, established the organization, and within a very short order, we back integrated, expanded, and started supplying goods for exports to the Korean economy over there, where there's a war going on. We became the largest exporters, and we very quickly expanded to the point PIDC had been set up to actually drive industrialization, and as soon as you set up any units, they were private, they would sell them off. So we bought a lot of them. We bought Kanafali paper, we bought Budwala textiles, we bought Lawrence Spool, and we diversified very quickly. By 1968, the group had become $250 million, employing 35,000 people. After 68, political uncertainties crept in. Field Marshal Ayub Khan ceased to be the president. Yahya Khan came in. We had a spate of new laws. The monopolies control law came in at that time. The security and exchange laws came in at that time. And the period of regulation started. In those 3 years, major changes were taking place in the illegal framework under martial law. After that, we lost East Pakistan. We lost half our group out there. The remaining part that was here, Mr. Zulfikar Bhutto came along and decided to change the direction, the paradigm of the economy, and went in for mass nationalization. So the half of the group that we had left here, half of that was nationalized. And what did that do for us? Well, within the family, it created absolute mayhem. Everybody was in a survival mode, just like the country. Nobody knew which direction we were going in the 70s. Taken over industries, basically said that the government no longer wants the private sector to be the engine of growth, that the government would take that responsibility. We have learned after several decades that that was a major mistake. Unfortunately, we're still suffering the ramifications of that. So in the 70s, private sector was not allowed to grow. Our family went into a discord. There was family tension, there were family disagreements. We were all over the place. It's a question of how do we survive. Then we come to the 80s. The 80s was a period in which fundamentally the policies that were laid down by Zulfikar Ali Bhutto were taken to the extreme, regretfully. And again, there's a situation where the private sector was not considered to be an important part of the Pakistani fabric. So much so that in 1982, I attended a very large function. The function was to extol the great achievements of the taken over industries. And in that, Mr. Majid Mufti, who was the then Secretary of Production, invited the whole cabinet of Pakistan to come down and participate in that. Mr. Ghulam Ishaq Khan, being the economic czar at that time, gave the keynote speech. And in the keynote speech, he said something which I will repeat to you verbatim, because I memorized it. He said during the speech, "My ideas of nationalization have not undergone any change in the last 20 years. It was 1982, last 20 years would mean 1962. 1962, nationalization took place in 1972. My ideas on nationalization have not undergone any change in the last 20 years. He went on to add, never will the commanding heights of the economy ever be returned to the private sector. Never will the commanding heights of the economy ever be returned to the private sector. So that was the paradigm in the 80s. Come the 90s, we had Mian Nawaz Sharif come in, and a young man, what an inspirer. He came in and he started changing the direction. And you saw the whole country transformed. You saw a situation where, as for me, my experience, there were so many international entities that were coming over, wanting to do partnerships with us, wanting to do business with us. But that didn't last. Very quickly, he was removed, and then we had the 90s, was what we call the lost decade. And so our ability to grow was also severely limited. Come to the 2000s, the first 10 years, the first decade, my father died on the 2nd of January 2002. And I had to assume the responsibilities for the group. At that time, what did we have? After all these years, we had an aging fertilizer project, we had rundown textile mills, 50 years old, machineries, it's nothing we could do with them. So it required me to determine what would be the direction we would take. It was fortunate that just before my father died, I did purchase Engro shares in the stock market. Why did I purchase Engro shares? Because the company that we had now, Hercules Fertilizers, couldn't grow. So I said the best way to grow was to buy out my competitor. So we both shared at Engro, and we have, by the grace of God, taken the Engro on a very large expansion program. So in 2002, when father died, as I said to you, industrially we were nowhere. But we had 27% of Engro. I joined the board, and that was in 2002. In 2003, I joined the board, and I was elected chairman in 2006. Since then, Engro, which had a turnover of approximately 1.5 billion rupees, grew. We went in for 5 expansions all at the same time. We put in the world's largest state-of-the-art single-train urea process, $1 billion expansion. We expanded our chemical terminal. We put in another new project, which is PVC. We established Engro Foods, and we established power generation. The country was burning flue gas, or we would call it's been doing it for 25 years. So we said to the government, why don't you allow us to convert it into power? It has not been done in the world. But we went and we worked with the Chinese and worked out how we were able to convert low BTU gas into power. And we established a 225 megawatt power project on it. 5 projects all at the same time. Thereafter, we had, again, considerable challenges. The government decided they would not honor their agreement to provide us gas for running the fertilizer project. We lost 3 years, and we were pushed to 2 weeks from bankruptcy. Fortunately, the gas was restored, and since then, look at the contributions we have made. Mr. Nawaz Sharif, as Prime Minister, was very kind. In July 2013, he invited me to be a member of his delegation to China. It was in there that the whole concept of CPEC was conceived, and then finally it was implemented. He put upon me a responsibility. He says, we've got an energy crisis in the country. I place upon you responsibility to establish 2,000 megawatts of power. Now you have to appreciate, we only had one 225 megawatt power project. By the grace of God, there was an opportunity that one of the major shareholders of HUBCO International Power wanted to exit the country. They were selling their shares, so we bought them. HUBCO was in a dilapidated state. It was serious trouble. In 4 years, we not only restored the plant, we've not only built up a complete management team, we've not only expanded the employment from 45 people to 700. We not only completed the project, the first IPP in the private sector based on water, which is Lareb. We also completed Narawal, which was under construction. And we negotiated with the Chinese to expand the power generation by 1,320 megawatts. And on top of that, we made investments in tar mining, and also now putting up a 330 megawatt power project based on local coal. Now, in all of this period of growth and the risks that we took, driven by the overall desire to contribute to our country, energy was the most important challenge. And so we put our efforts into that. HUBCO, which produced 1,600 megawatts, is expanding by 1,650 megawatts. So the responsibility that the Prime Minister placed upon me for 2,000 megawatts, we're going to be expanding by 2,650 megawatts instead. But on the way, we took on a very important project, TAR. Pakistan has the fifth largest deposits of coal in the world, 175 billion tons of it, sitting in Thar. And for the last quarter of a century, the federal government and the provincial government were not able to take any development action on that because they were in constant struggle as to who had the responsibility and the right to own those assets. Under the Constitution, coal is a mineral. So that belongs to the provincial government. Energy is a federal government subject. So what was coal? Was it energy or was it a mineral? And that went on for 25 years. I've been asked to conclude the session, which I'll endeavor to do. So, we have brought about a resolution to that because we undertook the risk of developing and undertaking all the studies that were required in order to develop the project. It's taken us 8 years of investment. And we've had the world's best consultants come in and look at every aspect of the project, including the environmental aspect and the water aspect and the flue aspect. We've covered everything. Based on that, based on our relationships with the Chinese, we were able to encourage them to come and joint venture with us to go in for mining. Now, Pakistan has never done mining. So from a business standpoint, the risks are very high. We've taken them. So we're mining now in Thar. It's a $1 billion project. And the seam is 600 feet down. I'd love to show you a video to tell you what the progress is. It's only a 4-minute video, but it really brings to heart what's going on. Based on that, we decided to put up 2 330 megawatt power projects, another $1 billion. Because of all of that, now the whole country is becoming interested in Thar. So we've got several private sector groups coming in and wanting to put up 330 megawatt power projects based on Thar. The block that we have is but 2% of the whole block, but we'll be able to provide 5,000 megawatts of power for 50 years. But the most important thing that we've done is our CSR activities. Tharis, who were literally in the Stone Ages, today our high point is the fact that Thari ladies today are driving our 60-ton dump trucks. We're setting up 3 schools for 3,000 students. We're setting up a secondary school, all free. We're also setting up a complete hospital, free. We're transforming our community from the Stone Ages to the present day. And you know, it's marvelous to see what is going on. So yes, these are some of the risks that we're taking and have taken. And I'm so happy to say that a lot of private sector people are joining us in this. So those are some of the achievements that we've done. And what are the learnings? The learnings are that we need an environment which is facilitative, which encourages us. When we have such an environment, which we've had for the last 15 years, you've seen the results that have come about. You see, when we, as chairman of ENGRO, we're very clear on how we run our business. We have a board and we have a management. And these are the 2 wheels of the organization of equal importance. The job of the board is to give vision, direction, and then ensure that there's a governance system. The job of the management is to strategize and perform. within the framework laid down by the board. And these are the results that you produce when you have clarity of roles. What's the problem in Pakistan? The problem in Pakistan is that there's a confusion of roles. The government should be like the board. They should say what is the vision, what is the direction, what is it that they want to get done, and what are the policies that they're going to develop as a consequence. And they leave it to the private sector to bring about the results. If we don't do that, we will have a confused economic model. And that's what we're suffering today. You've got the state, the SOEs, state-owned enterprises. They're losing billions of dollars a year. Nobody minds. Why? Because they're concerned about perhaps people losing their jobs. We can structure things where they don't lose any jobs. In fact, you'll find there's been an increase in employment. Look at the banks. Under the leadership of Dr. Ishrat Hussain, I had the privilege of being on the State Bank Board when he was a governor. He has transformed the whole financial system because he went out and defined the roles. He said the job of State Bank is regulation. It is not performing in the market. So the job of the banks to perform in the market, privatize them. And he did. And Habib Bank, which was being actually receiving support from the government while it was under state ownership, is today giving back an enormous amount of taxes. You know, we've got to learn that we've got to work as a team. Our problem in Pakistan is we're too introverted. Just as we had the problem in our family when there was no growth or we were not allowed to do things, it caused tension. So you see this in our society. Look at how shrill our politics. Look at the tug of war that is going on. Why? It's because we don't realize that we as a nation have to compete in the comity of nations. Look at our exports. It reflects that. Why has our exports gone down to 20 billion when we were at 25? In the same period, Bangladesh's exports is 40 billion. And Vietnam expanded its exports to 170 billion. And Vietnam was under American military not very long ago. It's because they realized that they had to perform in the comity of nations. And the only way you can really develop this country is when you turn around and are able to earn your way out. You can't do it on loans only. You've got to earn it. And the only way we can earn it is when all of us perform as one country. Look at what Sheikh Mohammed has done in Dubai, just across the water. How was that brought about? He set the vision, and on top of that, he was there long enough to ensure that these results will be brought about. You can see it here. Look at the development of Lahore. Look at the development of Karachi. It's all leadership. And we've got to realize that that is the single most important factor in our development. The other thing we've got to be very careful about is that Pakistan, because of a lack of resources, doesn't invest in human resource development. We're all told about that there has to be a knowledge economy, that when we go forward, it is knowledge that's going to be the defining difference. Well, I'd like to tell you that Bangladesh has got a $40 billion turnover exports because they concentrated on HRD. Vietnam has done the same thing. And now they're earning $170 billion from the Comity of Nations. We need to get our priorities right. Do you know? Do you have any idea what is going on? The birth rate in Pakistan is so high that we need a school for 300 children every hour, 24 hours a day. Have you ever realized what's going on? Sitting here 2 hours, we need 2 schools for 600 children. So instead of thinking I've been here for an hour, say I've been there for 1 school. Then you realize the enormity of the challenges that we have. And no country in the world has resources to be able to put up a school for 300 children every single hour. So we've got to think out of the box. We've got to think in different ways. We've got to provide our people every opportunity to be able to succeed. And the most important requirement in that is education. And what I'm worried about is already Karachi, for cities over 10 million, is the least educated city in the world. So human resource development is fundamental. It's absolutely imperative, and we are not prioritizing that. And what does that mean? Well, you will hear later on the importance of brand, the Pakistan brand. It is the humans of Pakistan that can transform that brand, not the assets. Look at America today. They've got everything, but they've also got Donald Trump. And you see what he's done. They may have all the resources, but do they have the respect? Ladies and gentlemen, all of us have got responsibilities for this nation. Every one of us. And what we've got to do is we've got to go out and have a competitive attitude to go out and compete in the comity of nations. And to be able to do it successfully, we need to have a good reputation. Reputation will attract partners. You can't do it on your own. Good partners will mean good results and a brighter future for all of us. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Now, sir, for a very insightful presentation. It seems that we have over an hour allotted time. I don't think we have time for question and answer. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you, all of you.